A pristine, stark white Christian Dior gown, a canvas of untouchable perfection, was what Marilyn Monroe was wearing when she signaled for a glass of deep red port wine that was about to change the fate of a young mother forever. The most expensive garment in the room was about to meet its crimson ruin, but the real disaster wasn't the stain. It was the crushing fear in the eyes of the terrified waitress carrying the tray. A single, isolated diamond earring sparkling under the restaurant's dim lights was the only thing giving away Marilyn Monroe's location. She was hiding in plain sight, yet her mood was miles away from the manufactured glamour that surrounded her. This was Romanov's, the kind of legendary Hollywood haunt where the air was thick with power, promises, and the scent of expensive cigar smoke and French perfume. On this particular night in the mid-1950s, the usual parade of studio heads and silver screen royalty were exchanging pleasantries, but one figure commanded the room's attention by actively trying to disappear. Marilyn sat tucked into a crimson velvet booth, a shadow in a room full of blinding lights. Her presence was quiet, almost reverent, as if she were a precious statue temporarily placed among the chattering elite. She wore a pristine, stark white Christian Dior gown, a sheath of silk so perfect it seemed impossible for any material to be so flawless. It was a dress that cost more than most people's homes, a statement of untouchable perfection. But if you watched her closely, past the platinum hair and the famous smile, you saw the tiny, almost imperceptible tremor in her hand as she held her glass. She wasn't Marilyn Monroe the legend, she was Norma Jean, lonely and exposed, wearing a costume of confidence. She was there with a studio executive, a man whose laughter was a little too loud and whose compliments felt a little too obligatory. The conversation swirled around budgets, box office numbers, and future roles, but Marilyn heard none of it. Her mind was a million miles away, lost in the familiar echo of the past, of an orphanage, of hunger, and of being utterly, devastatingly alone. She felt like an imposter, watching these powerful people, knowing that if the white silk were to suddenly tear, she would be thrown back to the cold reality of her humble beginnings. The dress was more than clothing, it was armor, and she was desperate not to chip it. The stark, pristine white was a canvas waiting for a color that should never touch it. That dark, aggressive color was sitting already poured on a tray in the kitchen, waiting for the young woman whose eyes held all the desperation in the world. She casually scanned the room, noticing a waiter dropping a napkin, a busboy struggling with a tray, a waitress with a face drawn taut by exhaustion. It was these invisible people she often connected with, the ones who were working furiously in the background to sustain the grand illusion of Hollywood. She watched the staff move, their routines polished by desperation and long hours. She knew what it meant to be one mistake away from ruin, what it felt like to survive on sheer will. She lifted her hand, signaling to her table service staff for a glass of something dark and heavy, a deep red port to match her internal storm. As the executive droned on about a new contract, Marilyn nodded politely, but her true focus was on the young waitress who acknowledged her signal. This girl looked frail, moving with an unsettling tension, her eyes darting nervously around the tables. The girl seemed utterly exhausted, her uniform clean but clearly well worn. Marilyn saw the sweat on her brow, the way she gripped the silver tray too tightly. The star herself was perched on a knife edge of anxiety, but it was the profound tension emanating from the waitress that truly drew her attention. This worker was carrying more than a tray. She was carrying the weight of the world, and it was about to buckle her knees. The flawless white silk of Marilyn's gown was a magnet, drawing the waitress and the inevitable tragedy straight toward it. But behind the velvet ropes and the laughter, one pair of eyes wasn't watching the icon. They were watching the clock, praying for the end of the shift, because the fate of a 7-year-old boy rested entirely on the strength of her shaking hands. Clara was 24 years old, and she wasn't serving to fund a drama class. She was serving for survival. Every smile was a forced effort, every cleared plate a small, desperate victory against the overwhelming exhaustion that gnawed at her. The weight of her worn, ill-fitting uniform felt like a lead cloak. While the guests spoke of multi-million-dollar deals, Clara worried about the $23.40 her tips would need to hit to cover young Leo's newest breathing treatment. Leo, her son, her brilliant laughing boy, suffered from severe chronic pulmonary issues. His condition meant frequent, terrifying midnight dashes to the county health center and a constant, crushing need for specialist care that Clara's meager wages barely touched. Her small, dusty apartment near the docks was home, and it was where Leo waited for her. Clara's husband had left 18 months earlier, unable to manage the constant pressure and the relentless needs of a child with delicate health. He simply vanished, leaving Clara with a stack of bills and a promise she silently made to her son. "I will never let you run out of air." That promise was the anchor that kept her standing through 16-hour shifts, scrubbing floors until her knuckles bled, and enduring the silent, arrogant contempt of the patrons she served. This restaurant job, harsh and unforgiving as it was, provided the only health insurance policy that would cover Leo's medication. A single serious mistake, and she would be instantly dismissed, forfeiting the policy and potentially risking her son's well-being. The manager, a stern, unforgiving man named Mr. Henderson, kept a constant, cold eye on her. He had already warned her twice this week about her slow movements. Clara knew he was looking for any reason to make an example of her and hire one of the endless line of younger, less burdened hopefuls waiting outside. She moved across the floor now with the frantic, brittle grace of someone walking on thin ice. Her eyes automatically calculated the distance between tables and the sharp, unforgiving edges of the dining chairs. When the signal came from Marilyn Monroe's booth, Clara felt a twist of profound dread mixed with forced relief. Relief because the woman had requested something, a chance for a decent tip, but dread because it meant serving the most famous, most photographed, and most dangerously judgmental person in the entire room. She carefully filled a tall, polished silver tray, 3 water glasses, a chilled bottle of champagne, and the dark, heavy port wine Marilyn had requested. The tray was dangerously overstacked, a testament to the manager's pressure to serve everyone at once. Clara gripped the edge of the tray until her knuckles were white, knowing that this single precarious trip across the dining room was not just about wine. It was about Leo's next breath. If Clara can survive this shift, she might save her son. If this story of human struggle and kindness has touched your heart, please hit that subscribe button below. We bring you tales like this every week, proving that the most important drama happens off camera. The tension in the air was thick, but it was nothing compared to the precarious, overstacked collection of glasses and carafes on Clara's silver tray, which now held the physical weight of her greatest fears. The order for Marilyn Monroe's table, the dark, heavy port wine and chilled water, was perched near the edge, a tiny glass precipice of disaster. Mr. Henderson, the tyrannical manager, had rushed Clara, screaming quietly that the guests were waiting and that the service was an embarrassment to the restaurant's flawless reputation. Clara felt the pressure in her temples and the tremor in her wrist. The heavy silver tray seemed determined to defy gravity. She had arranged the items meticulously, but the weight was distributed poorly, a silent testament to the number of requests she was juggling against the manager's impossible deadlines. Every footstep she took across the thick carpet felt muffled yet simultaneously amplified in her ears, like thunder rolling just beneath the floorboards. She was a tightrope walker, 50 feet above a cheering, unaware crowd, and the net below her was threadbare. Her path took her past the tables of Hollywood royalty. A famous director waved a demanding hand. A producer ignored her completely. Each glance, each dismissive gesture was a tiny stone added to the weight on her shoulders. Her vision narrowed until the only thing that mattered was the crimson silk booth where Marilyn Monroe sat, an ethereal figure in that blinding white gown. Clara remembered what her own mother used to say about the universe. It has a strange sense of humor. The very moment her focus was entirely fixed on the safe passage of the tray, her exhaustion betrayed her. A late arriving party, far too tipsy and loud for Romanov's decorum, stumbled past her station. The man, a minor executive trying to impress his date, extended his hand for balance and, without seeing Clara, brushed the edge of her tray. It wasn't a push, but a minuscule, barely perceptible impact, a single tremor of fate. In that agonizing, suspended moment, time slowed to a thick, syrupy crawl. Clara saw the port glass wobble. She saw the dark, expensive wine shift its balance, a gravity-defying tear escaping the rim. She tried desperately to compensate, twisting her body with the impossible grace of a dancer trying to avoid ruin, but the tray was too heavy, the weight too far off center. The glass tilted past the point of no return. The dark liquid seemed to hang in the air for a second, a ruby sheet of ruin destined for the one perfect, untouchable surface in the room. Clara squeezed her eyes shut, wishing desperately to rewind the last 3 seconds, knowing that the splash was coming, and with it, the termination of her hopes and Leo's welfare. The shattering noise was still seconds away, but in her mind, the sound of her son's distressed breathing was already louder than any broken glass. The disaster was inevitable, a crimson wave washing away the only security she had left in the world. She braced herself for the impact, knowing that she was about to face the wrath of the biggest star in the world. The dark wine, like a spreading wound, was about to meet the immaculate white silk. The sound of shattering glass and the collective, audible gasp of the most powerful people in Hollywood were drowned out only by the sickening, profound silence that followed, a quiet that seemed to suck all the air from the grand, opulent room. It was a slow-motion ruin, a catastrophe unfolding in the time it took for a single drop of expensive dark liquid to meet the pristine white silk. The tray hit the floor first, a metallic clamor swallowed quickly by the thick carpet. But the true sound of disaster was the heavy, sickening splat of the port wine on the fabric. That beautiful, aggressive crimson liquid seemed to attack the perfect stark white of the Dior gown with immediate, malignant speed. It wasn't a gentle stain. It was an explosion of color, soaking the delicate silk across Marilyn's entire left shoulder and bodice in seconds. The stain spread like a terrible spreading flower, ruining a garment that was a symbol of her wealth, her position, and her untouchable status. The entire dining room watched the transformation of a couture masterpiece into a terrible, damaged canvas. Clara stood petrified above the wreckage. All she saw was the ruin on the dress and the terrifying, unreadable silence of the woman wearing it. This wasn't just a ruined gown. This was a personal violation of a sacred idol. Clara's mind screamed a single desperate word: finished. Her job was gone. Leo's welfare was gone. The cold finality of the disaster struck her with the weight of an anvil. The patrons, these titans of industry and screen, watched the spectacle not with sympathy, but with silent, arrogant judgment. They stared at Clara as if she were a clumsy bug that had dared to land on the Queen's altar. Their silence was a cold, collective condemnation that told Clara she was worthless, that she didn't belong, and that her inevitable punishment would be justified. The studio executive sitting with Marilyn had leaped up, shouting for the manager, his face turning an unhealthy shade of purple. Mr. Henderson, the manager, materialized instantly, his voice a furious, whispered hiss aimed straight at Clara. "You're done, girl. Get out. Don't touch anything." But everyone was waiting for the true reaction. Every pair of eyes snapped back to Marilyn Monroe. The woman who made a living from her image remained eerily still. Her head was bowed, looking down at the terrible, spreading crimson stain that covered half her beautiful dress. The terror emanating from Clara was a physical thing, a thick, suffocating cloud. She braced herself for the dramatic outburst that would seal her fate in front of the world. She deserved the fury. She had destroyed something irreplaceable. The manager waited for Marilyn's cue. The famous star finally raised her head, and her eyes, those famous, captivating eyes, met Clara's. But the look in them was not the rage everyone expected. It was something profoundly and terrifyingly unreadable. Every eye in the room, CEOs, producers, starlets, was focused not on the ruined dress, but on the single, terrified girl who had committed the ultimate social sin, waiting for Marilyn Monroe to pronounce the sentence that would erase her future. Clara felt a profound physical disorientation, as if the floor had dissolved beneath her feet. The ruin was internal, complete. She stared blankly at Marilyn, whose silence was 1,000 times more painful than a scream. She was hearing the terrifying, high-pitched wheeze of Leo when his breathing was shallow. She was seeing the empty space in the cupboard where the specialty breathing apparatus needed to be. In that shattering moment, she didn't see Marilyn Monroe. She saw the end of her boy's chance for well-being. She wasn't just losing her job. She was losing the ability to access the specialized pediatric oxygen pump Leo needed nightly. The fear was a clock ticking down to 0. The wine stain had soaked through the dress and straight into her soul. Mr. Henderson, the manager, was a furious blur of black suit and red face. He gripped Clara's arm, his fingers digging in painfully, pulling her toward the kitchen doors. "You disgrace this establishment," he whispered. "You're finished. You can pick up your final pay tomorrow, and you'll be paying for that dress." The threat of debt was the final blow. Clara could only shake her head, a silent, desperate negation of his words. She tried to pull away from his grasp, needing to speak, to beg, to explain that this wasn't mere clumsiness. It was exhaustion. It was fear. It was the impossible weight of keeping her child alive. But no words would come, only a raw, dry sob trapped in her throat. She was about to be dragged away, publicly humiliated, and utterly ruined, all for a clumsy stumble she hadn't intended. The entire restaurant watched the spectacle, and no one moved to intervene. They saw a maid who had failed, a commoner who had dared to touch a goddess. The collective judgment was a cold, thick wave of indifference that told Clara that her struggle meant less than a piece of stained silk. Then Clara finally saw Marilyn Monroe move. The star lifted a slow, deliberate hand, not toward Clara, but toward the manager. It was a small gesture, simple and silent, but it carried the authority of a queen dismissing her guards. Mr. Henderson, stunned by the unexpected halt, instantly fell silent, his furious grip on Clara loosening. Marilyn was still looking at the stained fabric, but her face now held an expression of intense, quiet contemplation. She didn't look like a celebrity enraged. She looked like a woman remembering a long-forgotten, deep, personal pain. Clara braced herself. The removal had been paused, but the terrifying reckoning was surely just moments away. We have all been in a moment where we felt publicly shamed or unfairly judged, where one small mistake threatened to undo everything. Drop a comment below and tell us about a time someone saw your true struggle when everyone else just saw your failure. The sound that finally broke the silence wasn't Marilyn's anger or the manager's shout. It was a tiny, broken, and deeply private sob escaping Clara's lips as she realized her desperation had resulted in a terrible end for her son's stability. With the manager's hand still hovering near her arm and the star's eyes locked on her, the pressure became unbearable and Clara's carefully constructed composure dissolved. The words came out in a desperate, ragged whisper, not directed at the star or the manager, but at the wreckage on the floor. "I'm so sorry," she choked out, her voice barely audible. "I've lost everything. I can't. My son Leo needs his special medication, and now I'm dismissed. I have nothing left." It wasn't an excuse. It was an unspoken confession of her crushing circumstances, a private grief exposed in the most public, humiliating arena. The manager, Mr. Henderson, recoiled, momentarily stunned by the raw, unprofessional display of emotion. He tried to reclaim control. "Get her out of here! This is not acceptable service!" But before he could physically push Clara, Marilyn Monroe moved. It was not a dramatic sweep. She rose slowly from the booth and she took 2 small steps toward Clara. She stood directly between the terrified waitress and the enraged manager. The moment was electric. Marilyn reached out and, with unimaginable gentleness, took Clara's shaky, trembling hand in her own perfectly manicured one. The star's touch was not celebrity, but recognition, and when she heard the word son, the carefully maintained distance between Marilyn Monroe and Norma Jean shattered. "Shh!" Marilyn whispered, her voice low and husky, entirely for Clara's ears. "Don't you dare look at him. Don't you dare believe what they think of you." Clara, completely overwhelmed by the touch and the unexpected compassion, could only stammer, "The dress. It's ruined. I know it was expensive." Marilyn didn't look down at the stain, didn't flinch. She simply held Clara's hand tighter, forcing the girl to meet her gaze. The whole room waited, paralyzed, for the star's verdict. Marilyn's eyes were intense and steady, a profound depth of understanding passing between the 2 women, one famous, one invisible, who both knew what true, desperate struggle felt like. Marilyn didn't see a clumsy server. For one aching second, she saw a ghost, a reflection of the girl she used to be. Norma Jean, broke, ashamed, and terrified of the world's indifference. The moment Clara confessed her deepest fear instantly triggered Marilyn's memory. She wasn't standing in Romanoff's in a priceless gown. She was back in a lonely room, 18 years old, wondering how she would afford the next meal. The polished facade of Marilyn Monroe instantly fractured. She remembered the cold anxiety of poverty, the suffocating knowledge that one bad turn could bring about profound misfortune that no one would pity. She remembered the times she had been dismissed, pushed aside, and judged solely on her appearance rather than the quiet desperation in her heart. A sharp memory pierced the present moment. A rainy day in her early modeling years when an older, entitled photographer had humiliated her in front of a whole studio for spilling a single cup of coffee. The photographer had screamed, not about the cost, but about her worthlessness. That memory had faded under layers of platinum hair and red lipstick, but seeing the pure, unadulterated fear in Clara's eyes resurrected it whole. It was the same shame, the same crushing helplessness. She saw the manager, Mr. Henderson, standing there ready to devour Clara's future, and in his face, she saw the 1,000 cold, judging faces of Hollywood who had tried to do the same to Norma Jean. She realized then that the beautiful white dress, now ruined by the crimson stain, had done its final job. It had drawn the world's attention, forcing them to watch the tragedy of a young woman's ruin. A tragedy Marilyn understood at a cellular level. The dress was just silk. Clara's tears were real. Clara's son was real. The money, the fame, the power, it all meant less than nothing compared to the desperation of a mother fighting for her child. Marilyn's entire life was built on a magnificent lie, but in this moment of raw, exposed vulnerability, Clara had shown her the truth. She looked down at her own hand, which still held Clara's, feeling the genuine human tremor of fear. She had to save this girl. Not just from the manager, but from the crushing weight of the world that only sees mistakes and never sees the struggle. The studio executive and the manager's loud, self-important voices faded into background noise. Marilyn looked into Clara's eyes, and her decision was made. She had the power of a global icon, and she would use it not for image, but for quiet, essential kindness. The star was about to teach the whole restaurant what it meant to truly see another human being. She leaned in close, pulling Clara out of the harsh spotlight of the dining room and into a private moment of whispered, unexpected understanding, sealing a pact of empathy. Marilyn didn't raise her voice. She spoke only to Clara, her voice a low, melodic sound that cut through the silence. Clara was still shaking, convinced that Marilyn was about to deliver the final, crushing condemnation. Instead, the star smiled. It wasn't the famous camera-ready smile. It was a small, genuine curve of the lips, a smile reserved for private grief. She glanced down at the enormous dark stain marring the purity of the white silk, then looked back up into Clara's desperate eyes. And she spoke the 5 words that stopped the entire restaurant in their tracks. "It looks lovely on me." The air fractured with the sheer absurdity and power of the statement. The words defied logic, defied the catastrophic reality of the ruined dress, and most importantly, defied the collective, arrogant judgment of the room. The crimson stain was hideous, a blatant imperfection, yet Marilyn claimed it was lovely. It was a gesture of profound grace, a lie told to protect a vulnerable truth. Clara gasped, pulling back, utterly bewildered. The manager, Mr. Henderson, stepped forward, but the studio executive abruptly pulled him back, realizing that the star was staging an intervention the world had to respect. Marilyn gently squeezed Clara's hand, a connection that spoke volumes about shared hardship. "I mean it," she whispered. "This color, it's bold, it's different. It gives the dress character, don't you think?" She turned her head slightly so the light caught the side of the stain. The onlookers were forced to confront something far more compelling, an act of radical kindness. The star didn't care about the dress. She cared about the waitress. The message was clear. Clara had not ruined a garment. She had simply changed its aesthetic, and that change was acceptable. The 5 words were not about the fabric. They were about Clara's dignity. By declaring the stain lovely, Marilyn had instantaneously dismantled the entire crisis. Clara was no longer a catastrophe. She was suddenly, unbelievably saved. The sheer, dazzling power of celebrity was being used not to destroy, but to heal a desperate soul, all encapsulated in those 5 simple, stunning words. This single moment of grace, where a global icon prioritized a stranger's well-being over $1 million image, is a story that should never be forgotten. If this powerful act of kindness moved you, please share it with someone who needs a reminder that celebrity means nothing without compassion. The tears started subtly, first in the eyes of a hardened studio executive who remembered his own mother's struggle, then spreading like wildfire through the room as the entire restaurant witnessed not a disaster, but a beautiful human triumph. Marilyn's simple, powerful kindness had broken the cold spell of Hollywood judgment. The patrons, moments earlier a collection of judges and critics, suddenly became an audience for the raw truth. They looked at the sobbing waitress, then at the elegant star with the ruined dress, and a profound wave of collective shame and cathartic relief washed over them. They were crying not for the dress, but for the realization of their own indifference. The coldness that governed their world had been shattered by 5 words of grace. Marilyn gently released Clara's hand, stepping back only to look Mr. Henderson directly in the eye. Her voice remained low, laced with the quiet authority that no producer could buy. "This young woman," she stated, "is providing impeccable service and has just given this gown a unique, memorable flair. I will require another glass of that wonderful port, served by Clara immediately." The manager, utterly defeated by the star's magnificent performance of empathy, could only nod mutely. Mr. Henderson stood frozen. His power vanished. He was a defeated villain, suddenly exposed and stripped of his authority by a whisper and a smile. He knew his career in that exclusive establishment was over, not because of the stain, but because he had dared to threaten the vulnerable. Clara, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, moved mechanically toward the kitchen, her movements now filled with a strange, new dignity. She returned moments later, carrying a fresh glass of the dark port. As she set it down on Marilyn's table, the star performed the final quiet gesture of salvation. She reached into her tiny embroidered purse and pulled out a single, neatly folded $100 bill, an enormous sum for a waitress in the mid-50s. She pressed it into Clara's hand, enclosing it with a small private note. "This is not a tip, dear," Marilyn whispered. "This is compensation. For giving me a unique new design. Please keep smiling." The crowd watched, mesmerized by the quiet transaction. The $100 was enough to cover Leo's immediate needs and to provide Clara with a crucial buffer. The true gift was the dignity Marilyn had restored. By reframing the spill as an artistic design and the money as compensation, she had erased the shame of the mistake entirely. Clara clutched the money and the tiny note, unable to speak, her tears now those of overwhelming gratitude. The manager watched, powerless, as Marilyn picked up her freshly poured glass, the deep crimson of the port mirroring the beautiful, brave stain on her dress. The Queen of Hollywood had just saved a pauper's future, and the entire restaurant was silently weeping in stunned admiration. What the society pages reported the next day missed the true story, the silent promise made between two women that night, a covenant of shared pain that would fundamentally change a young boy's future forever. The dress became a footnote, but the dignity Marilyn restored to Clara became the foundation of a new life. Clara kept her job. The manager, chastened by the star's intervention, never again threatened her position. The patrons began treating the service staff with a new, quiet respect. The crimson stain on the white silk became an invisible shield around Clara, a reminder that she had been seen and defended by a figure whose opinion mattered more than the entire rest of the room. But Marilyn's kindness did not end with the performance in Romanov's. A few weeks later, a lawyer contacted Clara. The lawyer represented an anonymous benefactor who wished to establish a trust fund specifically for the long-term medical care of her son Leo. The fund was permanent, untouchable, and guaranteed to cover all of Leo's specialized treatments and hospital visits for as long as he might need them. The stress that had been slowly bringing about her decline for years instantly lifted. The anonymity was the most profound part of the gift. Marilyn ensured the truth would be kept a secret forever, proving that the most magnificent acts of fame are those performed in the dark, where the light of a camera cannot reach them. The only condition of the trust was anonymity, a condition Marilyn imposed to ensure the focus remained on the act, not the celebrity. Clara was overwhelmed. She understood immediately who the anonymous benefactor was. She never saw Marilyn Monroe again, never spoke her name in relation to the fund, and never told anyone about the true depths of the star's generosity. Clara raised Leo with the security Marilyn had provided. Leo grew up healthy, his chronic condition managed by the best specialists, his life unburdened by the financial fear that had almost destroyed his mother. Clara often looked at the single folded $100 bill and the lipstick-stained napkin she had framed, a testament to the night an icon saw past the glamour and into her profound humanity. The story teaches us that Marilyn Monroe understood the value of imperfection and the essential need for connection. She didn't seek the spotlight for her generosity. She sought to save a soul quietly, without expectation of praise. The white dress, ruined by the spill, became the greatest and most poignant garment she ever wore, a permanent, beautiful reminder that true empathy is more valuable than any fortune. The dignity of the stain proved that the greatest gifts are often given in secret, and the true measure of a person is how they treat the one person who can do nothing for them in return. If this powerful story of compassion and second chances touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Hit the notification bell so you never miss another secret moment of human kindness from Hollywood's golden age.